Okay, so, well, I'm glad that worked out all right. And how many of you have completed the reading of Gilgamesh? Did the whole thing? Wonderful, wonderful. And that's good to have with us. Although I'm going to take it piecemeal, I'm going to go just a bit at a time, just because although it's a short text, it's fairly dense. There are lots of things that are worth just pausing over, hovering over for a while, and sort of puzzling about, because it's just kind of a, I don't know, it's sort of a magical story. So we're going to take it easy, and as you know, it's going to take us today and then through next week and then on to Monday the following before we finish up our discussions on Gilgamesh. So I hope that we have good, rich conversations about it. I'm suspecting that we will. Let's start, John. I don't know if you have the same page numbers. If I go to the very first page of Gilgamesh in my text, it's the prologue. Everyone has a prologue in theirs? And that starts for me on page 61. Does that work for you too? Is it 61? Okay. I just don't know if I should use page numbers or not when I'm talking. Anybody have an idea, a sense from the video just about how old this story is? Like what's your ballpark guess? Like how many thousands of years old do you think it is? Take a stab at it.
6,000 years old.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Well, I think, you know, if you sort of date it along with the rise of this city called Uruk, or Uruk, however you want to say that, Uruk became a very important city in Mesopotamia at this particular time, and it was continuously inhabited for more than 4,000 years, starting back. Archaeologists have figured it goes back to 4100 BCE. And so if we figure that this tale is somehow synonymous with Uruk because it's Gilgamesh, one of the great kings of Uruk, we can safely assume that the story must be at least 6,000 years old. And I don't know how old it was, you know, before that, if it recedes into the sort of mists of history that we have no account of because there was no writing about it. It was an oral story before it was ever put into the cuneiform. So it's a very ancient story. It is often referred to as the first story in Western civilization because it's the first one, it's the oldest one that they can date that was ever written down. So yeah, an exceedingly ancient tale, Gilgamesh, king in Uruk. Let's just take it page at a time, if you don't mind. Did you see the video images of the temple Iana, which was the temple in dedication to Ishtar? You know how Athens in Greece is the city of Athena, right? And so it's named after her because she was like the patron goddess of that city, and they had special forms of worship, and they had more devotions for Athena than they had for any of the other gods in the pantheon. That's sort of what Ishtar was. She's also called Iana. So Ishtar was the sort of the principal goddess, the deity of this city. And at this particular time, because over time, the gods shift their valences, right? Like, so in the beginning, in here in Uruk, she is the sort of the goddess of love, the goddess of passion, right? Of connectivity, sort of like the Jungian anima in a way. But then she turns later and she has a sort of later in history, she has a kind of a more bellicose sort of patroness of war kind of identity with her. But they say that Ishtar, she's sort of like in the background behind almost all the other female deities. At some point they merge with her, or they share some sort of the same sort of importance or meaning that Ishtar has. So very, very important goddess in the city. Uruk, I was just reading on, I don't know what it wasn't Wikipedia, it was like ancient history website, that they consider it the first true city in the world because it was the place for the origin of writing as we know it, the cuneiform that was done on the clay tablets. The first example also of architecture in brick and stone. And the chief example, the most monumental example of that being the ziggurat, the pyramid-shaped temple that's in dedication to Ishtar. They had this thing called the cylinder seal, which I didn't really look up. Has anyone followed up on this stuff? Yeah, the cylinder seal. What can you tell us about the cylinder seal, Emma?
Cylinder seals, I had to learn about them in art history. Cylinder seals are used to mark clay for packaging and distribution of goods. So it's got like their name written in uniform on it. So if a certain person was shipping something, it was like from their company or whatever, from them, they stamped it with their seal by rolling it. And they're always buried with their seals because they're so important.
Yeah, very good. So a seal, how big is a seal?
I feel like 5 inches tall.
So and you roll it,
Yeah.
and it makes a stamp basically into clay. Is that how it works? Yeah, I was reading about that. I couldn't quite visualize how big these things were. So it was a form of identifying the individual. That's what the encyclopedia article laid stress on, is how the individual becomes more important in Uruk, right? The individual, the identity of the person, as opposed to the collective being the most important thing. In this case, this sort of the rise of individualism. All right, well, let's take a look at our hero Gilgamesh. Apparently, Gilgamesh was a historical figure who just sort of, you know, how political figures and important personages in history over time become parts of myth and legend and fable. Somehow, I think he became allegorized, right, and turned into a larger than life figure. Here's how the text begins. I will proclaim to the world the deeds of Gilgamesh. This was the man to whom all things were known. This was the king who knew the countries of the world. He was wise. He saw mysteries and knew secret things. He brought us a tale of the days before the flood. He went on a long journey, was weary, worn out with labor. Returning, he rested. He engraved on a stone the whole story. What's the emphasis there? So if this is our hero and part of a classic hero's tale, what's the nature of his boon, his gift? What is it that he brings back? What is the sort of the end result of his journey? Because this sort of starts with the end, right? What is it that he gave to his civilization?
Stories of what he has done and the stories of his strength and of like times before certain people existed, like before the flood.
Okay, yeah. So he does travel and he meets sort of like what you might call the Mesopotamian Noah, right, the survivor of the flood. So he goes and he meets this ancient man. And what's the gist though? What's the take home? What's his holy grail? What does he bring back? You know, because heroes of this dimension, they bring back something for their culture.
That no man is immortal.
All right. Everyone dies. It seems like it's basic, right? But he learns more on the journey than I suppose that. Here the text seems to be laying emphasis on his wisdom, right? It says that he knew, he was wise, he saw mysteries, he knew secret things. So it seems like the essence of what this hero brings is knowledge, right? A form of wisdom. He engraved on a stone the whole story. You know, there are sort of big heroes and little heroes, right? There are little heroes like in fairy tales who would like escape some sort of perilous predicament. And there are big heroes like Achilles who sort of shape their civilization. Which level do you suppose Gilgamesh is on? What is the text telling us? You think he's on the big scale? Yeah, he's on the large scale. He's on the cultural scale. Like his task is one that is supposed to result or does result in some sort of cultural enrichment. This wisdom that he brings back from having experienced the mysteries, because he engraved on a stone the whole story. So it's a cultural achievement that he brings. When the gods created Gilgamesh, they gave him a perfect body. Shamash, the glorious sun, endowed him with beauty. So Shamash is going to be, as you know, he's a god who is sort of like an ally, right? An ally of Gilgamesh's throughout. If you know how Odysseus, he had an ally, right? And he had enemies. The gods were sort of divided on his account. And if the same is true here, Gilgamesh's ally is Shamash, and who would you suppose his sort of foe is among the gods? Ishtar, yeah. It seems like it's Ishtar and Shamash. There's this, the feminine deity and the masculine deity are like on opposite sides, right? Shamash comes to his rescue, particularly early on, whereas Ishtar would have killed him if she could have, right? So yeah, we have a little bit of that going on. Shamash, the glorious sun, endowed him with beauty. Adad, the god of the storm, endowed him with courage. The great gods made his beauty perfect, surpassing all others, terrifying like a great wild bull. 2/3 they made him god, and 1/3 man. What's with thirds? When I read that, I was like, how do you get thirds? You know, usually it's halves, quarters, eighths, sixteenths when you trace heredity, you know. I don't know. It's a mystery. Thirds seem to be, thirds come up more often in I think there's another instance of thirds. I think that there was a certain amount of legality in thirds, in dividing property into thirds. And so maybe that's where they came up with, but what's the point? If he's 2/3 divine and 1/3 human, right? This is classic heroes sort of lineage, right? Lots of heroes are semi-divine. How come it's more on the divine side? Isn't it? It's more on the divine side, right? Yeah, he's 2/3 God, 1/3 man. What does that mean, practically speaking? I don't understand why he's not half and half in the first place. He's more God than he is man. What do we know of the gods, generally speaking? What's that?
They suck.
Yeah, well, they're unpredictable. Is that why they suck? Because
they like to create ponds and then put out little plays. At least Mother Nature.
yeah, that's interesting that you say that, create ponds, because if you go back to the creation story for the Mesopotamians, the reason the gods created human beings was to do their work, to cultivate the fields, to bring them food, and to take care of them. That's what humans were created for, to be the servants of gods. Can we understand the gods? I mean, as a general rule, are we as smart as they are? Do we get everything that they get? Generally not, right? There's something that's kind of like mysterious about their minds, and there's something that we can't make fully conscious. There's something that is resistant to the human knowledge about the gods. They move in mysterious ways. There's a mystery about them. They do things for unaccountable reasons. But on the other hand, so do people, right? You do things for unaccountable reasons. Oh, I'm sorry I did that. You know, we apologize for actions that we made because we did that at a moment of unconsciousness in a way, right? We didn't really realize, we didn't think far enough ahead because we weren't in touch with that, right? We weren't in touch with that. We were sort of unconscious of it in a way, right? And so if you're 2/3 divine, there's 2/3 of you that you really don't know that much about. 2/3 of you is mysterious and beguiling and, I guess, territory to be explored. And perhaps that's the point, right? That there's 2/3 of the destiny has yet to be understood. 2/3 of the destiny has yet to be stood in the light of day and to be seen the way that Gilgamesh later sees into the mysteries of things, right? 2/3 of him is a mystery. 1/3 of him is human and normal and ordinary in a way, right? Now, an interesting way to think about him. In Uruk, he built walls, a great rampart, and the temple of blessed Iana for the god of the firmament Anu, and for Ishtar, the goddess of love. Look at it still today, the outer wall where the cornice runs. It shines with the brilliance of copper, and the inner wall, it has no equal. Touch the threshold, it is ancient. Approach Iana, the dwelling of Ishtar, our lady of love and war, the like of which no latter-day king, no man alive can equal. Climb upon the wall of Uruk. Walk along it, I say. Regard the foundation terrace and examine the masonry. Is it not burnt brick and good? the 7 sages laid the foundations. Why all this emphasis on the city? Yes.
I guess because like he built it and it's supposed to be this big grand thing that's super strong, like almost representing what he is.
I'm sorry, could you say that one more time?
I said because he built it and it's this big like grand thing that's really strong, so it's almost like a representation of himself.
Yes, yes, it's a representation of himself. It has his stamp on it, and they equate him with it. Very good. And this emphasis on the walls, how sturdy, the copper, right, the materiality of it, this beautiful city. Well, people take pride in their cities still today, right? And what are we taking pride in? What's the achievement in all that? What goes into that? What must exist in order for this building, this coming into fruition of civilization? What must be there? What conditions have to be met?
I guess have some sort of sway over people to get people to work for him.
Mm-hmm. He definitely has that, doesn't he? We find that out for sure. Energy, right? It takes not just raw primitive energy, right? It takes this sort of organized, concerted group effort to create a city, a civilization, which is lasting, which is rich in and of itself. The sort of the material structure of it is the pride is in the materiality, this creation of civilization. It's a thing that human beings are justly proud of in this book, right? It is the reason for activity, is to create both the material and the spiritual means of having what we call human civilization. And that's something to be proud of. We're not simply squatting. We're not just getting by from day to day. In fact, we do far more than that, right? We do far more than that. We have incredible learning. We look into the stars. We build fortresses where we can remain safe from the floods and from our enemies. We engage in trade. We study other people and their language and their music. In fact, we have 250 recipes for craft beer, right? Civilization itself, I think, is what's being held up here as the prize. Civilization. It's a glorious thing. It is an achievement of humanity to create these things. And Uruk is the place where it happened. And Gilgamesh is one of the founders of that place. How wonderful is this, right? So it's a celebration of human civilization, which has to be earned. And it's not without its ambivalence, right? I mean, civilization as we know it, like we're living in civilization, are we not? We're living in civilization some 6,000, 7,000 years after this wonderful, initiate first page of talking about how great civilization is. And here we are 7,000 years later, wondering if we're going to be able to cohabit with natural life on this planet. Our civilization has grown so intense. We have become so numerous. We have gotten so good at this project of civilization that in a way we're becoming our own Achilles heel, if I can go mythological on you. You know what I'm saying? So civilization is something that's hard fought for, that takes a lot of conscious effort. Human beings need to be organized. We can't just be unconsciously going around the world. We have to be organized. We have to be 2/3 human and 1/3 divine. That is less mysterious to ourselves and more reliable in order for us to even create something that we can call civilization. And then be even more mindful that our civilization is as good as we hope it is. It takes even more mindfulness. And so I think part of this whole story is about coming into mindfulness, coming into civilization. What does it take to become more human? And can we achieve greater humanity without losing precious things in the bargain? So it's a wonderful start to the page. There's a lot in here. It's sort of like in the background. Let's go on. Oh, geez, I never looked it up. Did anyone look up this word? Can anyone look up the word for me? Toxin, Tocsin. I'm just going to start reading, and if you don't mind, you can just look that up. The coming of Enkidu. Gilgamesh went abroad in the world, but he met with none who could withstand his arms till he came to Uruk. But the men of Uruk muttered in their houses. Gilgamesh sounds the tocsin for his amusement. What is the tocsin?
Alarm bell or signal?
Okay, thank you. He sounds the alarm bell or signal for his amusement. His arrogance has no bounds by day or night. What is he? I'm not sure what he's doing here. The text is so brief that it's unclear. He sounds the tocsin for his amusement, the alarm bell. What is he just like messing with the people? I'm going to go ring the bell. Ding, 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 ding. He's like the little boy who cried wolf or something. I mean, is this how he amuses himself, by sort of vexing the people, scaring them? I don't know. No son is left with his father. I guess he's putting people to work. One thing you can say about Gilgamesh is he has a tremendous amount of energy, right? The energy that's required to create anything out of life, right? Out of the raw material. He has this energy. No son is left with his father because he's building a wall, or he's digging a canal, or he's doing something for the purpose of Uruk. For Gilgamesh takes them all, even the children, yet the king should be shepherd to his people. His lust leaves no virgin to her lover. So apparently there was a law which allowed the king of the city to lie with a bride prior to her being with her husband for the first time. And he enjoyed that, on every occasion that he could. Yeah. His lust leaves no virgin to her lover, neither the warrior's daughter nor the wife of the noble. Yet this is the shepherd of the city, wise, comely, and resolute. So he's a mixed bag, right? He's 2/3, 1/3. The gods heard their lament. So the people cried out to the gods, help us. This guy is lording it over on us. We need some relief from this guy. He's beautiful, he's powerful, he's energetic as can be, but he's also killing us. The gods of heaven cried to the Lord of Uruk, to Anu, the god of Uruk. A goddess made him strong as a savage bull. None can withstand his arms. No son is left with his father, for Gilgamesh takes them all. And is this the king, the shepherd of his people? Anyway, didn't I just did all that. Or it's repetitive, okay. His lust leaves no virgin. And then when Anu had heard their lamentation, the gods cried to Aruru, the goddess of creation. You made him, O Aruru. Now create his equal. Let it be like him as his own reflection, his second self. Stormy heart for stormy heart. Let them contend together and leave Uruk in quiet. The people cry out. This energetic king gives us no peace. The gods heard, and the gods respond with a clever idea, right? That only the gods could come up with. Who would have thought that this would be the answer? Create someone who is like him, his equal. Create someone. And then we have almost like twin Gilgameshes, but they're decidedly different in certain ways, right? And when you have twins in literature, when you have twins, particularly in mythological literature, one thing that when you see two of something, it makes you think more about the one, if you know what I'm saying. If there were a bunch of books on the shelf over there, and they were all different, except that two right next to each other were the same, your eyes would focus on those. And so there's something about twinning that helps you to understand the nature of the one. That is, Gilgamesh's nature will be understood better when we understand him as he interacts with Gilgamesh, right? So this notion of twinning is important to give us insight into the nature of the principal character. So the goddess conceived an image in her mind, and it was of the stuff of Anu of the firmament. She dipped her hands in water and pinched off clay. She let it fall in the wilderness, and noble Enkidu was created. Who else? What other humans were created in a similar way?
Prometheus? Was he the one who did that?
Did he create from clay?
Yeah.
Well, what about the Bible? What were people? What was Adam created from? Wasn't it dust?
Dust of the earth.
Yeah. So that's the earth as well, right? And the earth, even though the Bible doesn't say it, the earth is mother typically, right? So the mother gives of her body, her substance, and then the Lord sort of breathes on it, right? And it's this combination of mother and father. But in the Bible, the mother is kind of not emphasized. It's just dust. But then the breath of God. This is sort of similar. Here's the creation of a human from clay, and then she breathes on it, right? Pinched off the clay, she let it fall in the wilderness, and noble Enkidu was created. There was virtue in him of the god of war, of Ninurta himself. All of these gods' names, of course, you can find in the back of the book in a glossary, if you want to look them up. His body was rough. He had long hair like a woman's. It waved like the hair of Nisaba, the goddess of corn. His body was covered with matted hair like Samukhans, the god of cattle. He was innocent of mankind. He knew nothing of the cultivated land. Okay, I'd like to ask you just to write for a second, if you don't mind. Because I don't quite understand this. I made the suggestion, which, of course, anything that I'm saying up here, I'm just suggesting. I have no idea. I'm just interpreting the text like you. But my hunch was that, Gilgamesh is sort of like this advanced guy, or he's going to bring this advancement of civilization. That seems to be his hero's quest. That's what the early paragraphs tell us, that he brings back wisdom. He sees into the secrets of things. There's kind of an advancement about him. And yet at the same time, he's like this ego-driven guy who puts everybody to work, and then the gods create his equal. But when they create his equal, here's my question. Why do they create a primitive man with hair all up and down in his body, matted hair like an animal? He's a natural man. He's primitive. He's not as advanced as Gilgamesh. Why would they do that? That's why I'd like you to just puzzle about that for a second or two. Why create a primitive or natural man for Gilgamesh's companion?
Typical cylinder seals between 3 and 4 inches.
Oh, 3 and 4 inches. Thank you. Okay. Thoughts? Primitive, if you want to call Enkidu that, is created after the more advanced. It seems to reverse the order. I wonder what being suggested. Finley.
I think because Gilgamesh is so based on his accomplishments, and what he's done for the city. My theory is that the gods knew that Enkidu was gonna become his companion, and I think that what the gods are trying to do is kind of balance him out as a person, kind of trying to put this modest, humble voice in his life that would kind of bring him down back to earth from just trying to be like this hero who just did anything his courage willed it, which he still pretty much does, obviously. But I think it was kind of to try to bring Gilgamesh back from the top, hot horse he was kind of on.
Mm-hmm. Very nice. Nice. Other thoughts? Yes. Max, sorry.
It's kind of like they're equal because they're so opposite in how they kind of, in appearance, reflect each other's virtues and all that.
Mm-hmm.
So Gilgamesh looks all great, but that's really kind of how deep inside how Enkidu feels about the world. And he looks primitive and all kind of ugly based on what people probably think, which is kind of how Gilgamesh will be seen on the inside.
Interesting. So you're kind of riding right alongside Finley in that notion, right? That there's a balancing act. Is that what we're sort of getting here? That Enkidu balances out the what's lacking in Gilgamesh? If Enkidu provides that which is lacking, what would you say it is? In some way, yeah, I can see that. He seems like he's so hard driven. He's the kind of person who would drive himself so hard that he would eventually have a heart attack, right? Because he wouldn't even pay attention to the signs in his body. His body might be telling him with high blood pressure, with like shortness of breath, with dizziness, might be telling him for weeks and months, maybe even years, that he's driving himself too hard. But he's unconscious he's not aware of his own basic rootedness in his body, right? And here we have, I think, as Finley was saying, somebody who is all about that, right? So there's the balance to become conscious of what he's unconscious of, right? He's a hard driving guy, but he's largely unconscious of the fact that he has a negative impact on himself and he's driving others into the ground as well. So he needs to be put back into touch with those things he's unconscious about, being his body, his naturalness, right? His instinctual, his unconscious nature. And here comes this person who is at one with nature to show to Gilgamesh what it is that he can't see on his own, right? The twinning effect is to see what you need to see. You have to sometimes see it in another, right? Because you can't detect it in yourself. But his beautiful primitivity, I mean, he runs with the gazelles, right? And he drinks at their same watering holes, and he undoes the traps laid by the trapper out there in nature, and he's basically like a wild animal himself. But that doesn't last for very long, because the trapper becomes disillusioned. And eventually word gets back to Gilgamesh, and Gilgamesh says, what is Gilgamesh? Now, Gilgamesh becomes a kind of a clever solution seeker himself. He hears about this wild man that nobody can stand up to out there, releasing the animals from the traps, etc. Here's how you fix that. What does he say? Yes, bring in a woman. Not just any woman, a hierodual, right? You guys know that word? Hierodual? Which means she has an official office. That is, that she works in the sort of the temple of the god Ishtar. She is a sort of a priestess, but also a prostitute, right? This is a very strange sort of social position that you find in the ancient world, not just in Mesopotamia, but also other parts of the nuclear Near East, thousands and thousands of years ago. This notion of a priestess who, in our sense, in our way of looking at it, is also a prostitute. Not that there's any money changing hands here, but the act of sex, the act of physical union between two people is this incredibly powerful, energetic, mysterious thing that occurs. And it's a part of the worship of Ishtar, because she is this goddess of love, this goddess of fertility, this goddess of procreation. But also significantly, this Shamhat, she's not merely a person who lies with Gilgamesh. What else does she do? Pardon me?
She advises him, clothes him.
Feeds him, advises him, clothes him. Would you say improves him?
In the eyes of civilized people, maybe.
In the eyes of civilized people, very good. Yeah, it's like she civilizes him in a way, right? Let's take a look at the text. So he goes there on 64, bottom fourth. The trapper spoke to her. They're just walking up to where Enkidu is going to be. There he is. Now, woman, make your breast bare. Have no shame. Do not delay, but welcome his love. Let him see you naked. Let him possess your body. When he comes near, uncover yourself and lie with him. Teach him, the savage man, your woman's art. For when he murmurs love to you, the wild beast that shared his life in the hills will reject him. She was not ashamed to take him. She made herself naked and welcomed his eagerness. As he lay on her murmuring love, she taught him the woman's art. For 6 days and 7 nights they lay together. Days began in the evening in this culture. And 7 days was a quarter of a lunar cycle. So 7 was an important number for them, but it was also an unlucky number. The 7th, the 14th, the 21st, and the 28th were unlucky days. So for 7 days, they lie together. For Enkidu had forgotten his home in the hills, but when he was satisfied, he went back to the wild beasts. And what happens? Then when the gazelles saw him, they bolted away. When the creatures saw him, they fled. Enkidu would have followed, but his body was bound as though with a cord. His knees gave way when he started to run. His swiftness was gone, and now the wild creatures had all fled away. Enkidu was grown weak, for wisdom was in him. And the thoughts of man were in his heart. So he returned and sat down at the woman's feet and listened intently to what she said. What just happened to him? He felt the same, but when he went to join the creatures, they did not feel the same about him. What has happened? Seems like there's been a loss and there's been a gain. How would you describe those? Go ahead, Finn.
He lost his connection to what he thought was his home, like the wilderness, the animals that lived within it. But he gained his connection to the civilized world of man and started understanding the basic things that people know, which is like love, lust, and it says wisdom. So he probably started learning other things about people and things that weren't animals and trees.
Started learning the things that we would call the civilized things, right? The things of human culture. That's what he gains, right? He gains this wisdom. He gains this knowledge. He starts to become civilized, right? And he loses his identification with nature. He never had to think twice about it. He just was that. He was identified as that, right? He was identified with nature, but now he's lost that identity and his identity is shifted. Do you feel like that's a truism about life? Like when you learn something, when you gain wisdom, something else is gone from you? Is there, in other words, a sacrifice that we make to obtain knowledge? Kristen, I see you nodding your head.
I feel like sometimes, like, when you gain certain knowledge, it's almost like losing this, like, innocence part too sometimes. Because if you don't know things, so you could, like, lose innocence.
Yeah, you lose innocence. Very nice. And innocence, I think, is a way of describing Enkidu's identification with nature. He didn't know any better. He didn't know anything, maybe. Or what was his knowing? What do animals know? It was that, whatever that was. And you lose that innocent nature when you acquire knowledge. That's also part of the garden story, isn't it, out of the Bible? And there was a loss there, right? You have to bite the apple. And when you bite the apple, you gain knowledge, but then it's too late because you lost your innocence. It's too late for your innocence. It's not too late for your wisdom. That's where wisdom comes from. There's a bargain there, right? Interesting. She says to him, because he lies down on her feet, almost like a student, like a child, to learn, to hear more information. She says to him, "You are wise, Enkidu, and now you have become like a god." It's a nice thing to say to someone who just lost his innocence, right? No, if you think about it, he's probably a little bit deflated. He is no longer what he always thought of himself. Yes, he's gaining this wisdom at her feet. Yes, he's gained some knowledge of this other world, but he's also lost everything that he was. So there's been a loss, right? There's been like a deflation, in a way, a sacrifice, as the way that there always were sacrifices every 7 days in that culture. So the sacrifice that he gives is his innocence. And with that sacrifice, there comes some deflation, right? There could be a little depression that comes along with that. So she builds him up.
What I don't understand is how he, like, he's described as gaining wisdom as soon as he enters the world of man, but Gilgamesh is also considered wise after like traveling to every known place and having every possible journey and knowing all these different people. So I feel like that there's kind of an inconsistency in either an inconsistency or they're just trying to emphasize how Enkidu's like wisdom just like comes to him because he all of a sudden is now considered wise, just like Gilgamesh, and they have both had like very different experiences. One was substantial, and the other was just basically born yesterday.
Right. So how does he get all this compressed into such a short time, sort of thing? Like how is Enkidu considered wise when he's just had this one experience that has lasted him a week and it's taken Gilgamesh his whole life? Right. Well, I guess maybe we chalk it up to the compressions of storytelling, perhaps, you know. And also it's rather than being naturalistic, as in a realistic portrayal of how long it actually takes for these things to happen, it's more here to illustrate the sort of the cycle that a human being goes through in life, as a reminder to us all, right? That you lose your identification with your mother in a way, you lose your identification with the earth, you lose your identification of your innocence at a certain point in your life. And then you feel estranged from that. And there's a little bit of a loss there. But then civilization comes to sort of buoy you back up, where she says to him, you are wise. You become like a god. Why do you want to run wild with the beasts in the hills? Come with me. I'll take you to the strong walled Uruk, to the blessed temple of Ishtar, of love in heaven. There Gilgamesh lives, who is very strong and like a wild bull. He lords it over men. When she had spoken, Enkidu was pleased. He longed for a comrade, for one who would understand his heart. So he's going through the life cycle, right? This is the next stage in the evolution of the individual. Come, woman, and take me to that holy temple, to the house of Anu and Ishtar, to the place where Gilgamesh lords it over the people. I will challenge him boldly. I will cry out aloud in Uruk, I am the strongest here. I have come to change the old order. I am he who was born in the hills. I am he who is strongest of all. Boy, her message really hit home, didn't it? he's feeling pretty confident all of a sudden. And that's sort of her job, is to see him and to help him, to nourish him, to give him the confidence that he needs for his mission in life, in a way, right? So there's something interesting happens on the next page. She says, if you go to page 66, that last line in that top paragraph, Shamash, the glorious sun, has given favors to Gilgamesh and Anu, the heavens, and Enlil and Ea, and the wise has given in deep understanding. I tell you, even before you have left the wilderness, Gilgamesh will know in his dreams that you are coming. How does she know that? I don't know how she knows that, but she does. She must know Gilgamesh in a way, right? And then Gilgamesh does have these dreams. And these dreams are interesting. Dreams are a big part of this whole tale, are they not? How important the dreams are and the interpretation of the dreams. The dreams give people confidence to do things, and also sometimes they enhance the fears that people have at certain times. They seem to have premonitory sorts of, almost like prognosticatory powers, like they dream something and it happens, right? A dream is a foretelling. I don't know if you have dreams that are like that. But oftentimes dreams are anticipatory of things that will happen to us, not just like recollections or just pure fantasies, but in this tale, the dreams have a lot of significance. And it reminds me of when I heard about some folks in Australia who live out in the bush, and they, the elders of this communal group of like 300, 400 people, they would get up first in the village each day, and they would go up to the hill, they start a fire, 3 or 4 of them, and they would go around the circle and they would talk about their dreams. What did you dream last night? Everybody would tell their dream, and they would talk about their dreams, and based on the dream, they would plan their day. So People actually even organize their lives around interpretations of their dreams. They find the dreams to be a highly important, significant thing. And here we have a couple of dreams. First, there is the dream of the star. Mother, I had a dream. I was full of joy. The young heroes were around me, and I walked through the night under the stars of the firmament, and one, a meteor of the stuff of Anu, fell down from heaven. I tried to lift it, but it proved too heavy. All the people of Europe came around to see it. The common people jostled, the nobles thronged to kiss its feet. And to me, its attraction was like the love of woman. They helped me. I braced my forehead and raised it with thongs and brought it to you, and you yourself pronounced it my brother. That's an interesting dream that I guess I'll be taking up with the Mondays class, because it looks like we've gotten to the end of our class period today. Thank you all for being here, and stay in touch with the D2L videos, and I will see you in a week. If you ever want to participate in a class that you're not in, like a Wednesday or a Monday, I guess one thing you could do, if you have like a question or a comment, you can always send me those via email, and I will just bring it up during the class. There's no reason why you should be silent except for this one day. So if you ever get that notion, like there's a question that you want or a statement that you want to make, please send those to me, and I will bring those up in the next class. All right, have a nice weekend, and I'll see you next week.